On today's show, the fifth and final spot for the Padres rotation. I understand that that's the question, but I want to look back at the past few years' recent history of the Padres and their pitching development, and whether or not it suggests that, are they quietly not getting enough credit for being pretty good at developing talent? And the fifth spot, no matter who it is, we should have confidence in? We're going to talk about all of that in just a second.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Wednesday, February 26th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. And you can also see my written work for justbaseball.com, a great website, and also my new podcast over there, Baseball vs. the World, getting brought back starting next week. So stay tuned for that, guys. Today's episode, we are talking about, in a similar vein to people who maybe you didn't tune in. It's fine. We all got things to do. Everybody wants to see the Luka magic and all that stuff. I get it. Maybe you missed my episode recently about the most kind of fun moments and kind of just looking back at this past 5 years of Padres baseball, because I really think that we've seen so much happen over the last 5 years that's worth talking about. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. And specifically, I want to talk about the pitching development of this franchise, because for a long time, I don't think pitching development is exactly what the Padres have been known for, right? So we're going to be talking about that and then concluding with why all of that is why I'm not really all that nervous, or at least not as nervous as one would think about the question over who is going to be the fifth starter. We talked about in spring training notes, whether it's Kyle Hart, whether it's Randy Vasquez, Matt Waldron, my boy, Stephen Kolek, suddenly my boy, Stephen Kolek. But instead, I just want to talk a little bit about recent Padres pitching development. And while I'm not an expert in terms of the finer mechanics, as everybody knows, I am pretty miserable when it comes to math. And frankly, I think that talking about math too much on the podcast form, a podcast platform, can be a little bit boring. So go check out written work for that. But I think that today's episode is just about looking back at the past a little bit and then also the present, because I do think that the Padres, on top of we've discussed ad nauseum about how much they've changed as an organization, how much they've changed, they flipped the script, as the the branding, I guess, would say, right? And I think that also happened with pitching, and dare I say that that was the more important factor, at least in my opinion. I'm going to explain why. For sure, guys. And also, let me just note that today's episode, I'm sorry for being late. I had a lot of issues come up for all my listeners who are used to being, at a certain time and whatnot. To make it up for you, though, big interview coming on Friday, and I will explain who that is on tomorrow's episode. It's an editor for Fangraphs, and we're going to be talking about Jackson Merrill, so stay tuned to that. But let's start at the beginning. For as long as I've been around, man, the San Diego Padres have not been known for starting pitching. Frankly, pitching in general, basically outside some exceptions, your Trevor Hoffmans, obviously. And there was that one year when the Padres, I think was it 2015? I forgot which year it is exactly, in which they did produce some starting pitching value, right? The Tyson Ross year, I believe. Tyson Ross was pretty good, and then all that, right? And Ian Kennedy, I think, was at least, frankly, I wouldn't mind Ian Kennedy in today's rotation to take that fifth spot. Don't get me wrong. But in general, I just knew the Padres for a team that was constantly almost chasing shadows, almost chasing ghosts, and just not able to acquire what they would want to. And frankly, the most famous thing that I think the Padres are known for in terms of pitching, in terms of a stain is a strong word, but in terms of a little bit of it became their title card. It becomes what's in the first obituary of Padres pitching development 21st century, in my opinion, is Andrew Cashner. Andrew Cashner, for those who forgot, was the player that the Padres traded Anthony Rizzo as a prospect for. It was, at the time, viewed as a pretty, from what I understand and from what I've read, a pretty even balanced trade. This is a team that wanted pitching, and then the Cubs were like, let's get a good hitter. And yes, I understand the Padres clearly made the wrong decision there, but Andrew Cashner was highly regarded at one point. In fact, he was actually good at one point. He did have a good season for the Padres. But for whatever reason, Andrew Cashner just didn't become what I think everyone thought he was going to be. He had a career. He was in the league for 9 seasons. He still had some fortune at points. But the Padres, they acquire him, and then he's kind of doing really well. His first season, full season, I should say, with the Padres in 175 innings, 3.09 ERA, and he had a FIP of 3.35. And then after that, in 2014, he pitched a little bit less. He didn't get as many strikeouts as maybe people wanted him to, but 2.55 ERA and a FIP of 3.09. And then it all fell off after that. And I feel like that's what I remembered before I started hosting this podcast, is I was like, that's the team that, Andrew Kasher could never figure it out for them. And then Tyson Ross, they found something and then they didn't, right? That's what I feel like I knew about the Padres, at least in terms of modern Padres. Forgive me if I don't know about the 70s and 80s and 90s and whatnot. And then along comes, in my opinion, what I always like talking about in the video, talking about the fast 5 years of memorable Padres moments. I think 2019 is really where I try to start. Everything before that was the prequel. And then 2019 with the Manny Machado signings, when things got a lot more real, a lot more serious, right? In 2019, let's start there. And let's also start by saying this. The San Diego Padres, I literally know people, and I'm not going to name my sources, that are like, at one point, this is years ago though, around this time in 2019, the people that I knew, and especially in 2020 as well, which we'll get into, the Padres were primarily known for one thing, which is, not one thing. They were known for a few things. One of them being that they were featured in a Drake and Josh episode that's very funny called Foam Finger. But one of them was that teams would basically say, target Padres pitching, and especially target Padres prospects, right? They were like, go for these guys, man. They don't know what they're doing, right? And that is, I'm not saying that is a narrative that has been completely ameliorated over the past few years, but I do think it's gotten better. I'm not making this up, guys. Like, I know people who are like, look, prospects, scouts, and stuff like that, they're like, go target Padres pitching. But that was a while ago. And let's start in 2019. And 2019 was a season that, in my opinion, was mostly about just falling apart, right? Like, it was a little bit of a fall apart, even though they did acquire Manny Machado. It was a team that, frankly, was very, very weird. And I'm fairly confident that I'm just going to put all the blame on the uniforms being as cliche and generic. You know what I mean? It's almost like one of the companies these days where they make everything as boring as possible and suck the life out of it and all of that stuff. But aside from 2019 and the Hunter Renfroes and the Franmil Reyes of it all, my brother, we love him. In 2019, you did see, at least, the emergence of Chris Paddock. And while he fell off of that, I do want to keep in mind that it's not like Chris Paddock was the Andrew Cashner situation where, like, they had him for years and the talent was clearly there and they didn't develop any further. The Chris Paddock was quite poor afterwards, and he basically didn't have anything else. And it's clear that his changeup, while excellent, that his fastball was too straight, and he did not have a third pitch. And it's very hard for pitchers to stay consistent at that level. But overall, I get it. That was a time when people were like, the Padres have Joey Lucchesi and Eric Lauer. Eric Lauer is the opening day starter. What is going on? And nowadays, you look at this team and you're like, things have changed. And it's not just because of the trades. It's also because some of the development that I think that they've had. And I think that they've secretly had a lot of luck with pitchers. And we're going to go through the rest of that history after 2019, that very weird 2019 team, in just a second, guys. But first, we need to take a second to talk about one of our sponsors, and dare I say, one of our yummiest ones. Folks, let me tell you, we love these guys. We love these guys very, very much. They are the snack that's both delicious and nutritious. Nutritious. See, I'm getting so excited about wonderful pistachios that I mess up the word nutritious. That's right, guys. And with pistachios, wonderful pistachios, it is one of the highest protein nuts out there. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep going and feeling fuller for a lot longer. It's fantastic, guys. I am full of all the flavors. You want the little bit of the roasted, you want a little bit of spice, you want the no shell variety, you got that too. I'm a little bit of a shell guy. You know why? Because I like the crunch. I like snapping them. And honestly, it keeps me a little bit away from them in a good way. It's kind of like I'll just grab a few and call it a day. There's something satisfying about it. I can't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it's the baseball player in me. You know what I mean? We're sunflower seed people, gum, foods that you just chew on a lot and you're not necessarily, it's like kind of idiosyncratic foods. I don't know what I'm saying, but bottom line is I love what Wonderful Pistachios has to offer, guys, and you're going to like them as well. Get snackin' and get crackin with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. And just like that, everybody, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your first listen every day. Remember to subscribe to the pod wherever you get your pods from, by guys. And also, remember, follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky. Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Go do that. I would appreciate it. Really, really much. Love you. Let's talk about 2020. 2020 is when things got a little bit rowdy for the Padres, right? Because a little man by the name of Fernando Tatis Jr. joined the team in 2019 and absolutely took off in 2020, got himself the MLB The Show cover, and then things got a little bit with him for a little bit. He was kind of in some hot water with motorcycles and PEDs and injuries and, Manny Machado yelling at him and whatnot. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about pitching. And in 2020, we saw the Padres do well with starting pitching, and it was the beginning, laying the foundation of the Padres doing well with not just who they targeted, but also with just putting together a rotation in 2020. And I understand that it was a shortened season, but it's still something that deserves credit, right? The first thing is you can't fake, man, what my man Dinelson Lamet pulled off, right? While Chris Paddock did have a regression, a mighty regression. Instead of having the ERA that he had previously, his first year of 3.33, he jumped all the way up to 4.73. The fastball was too straight. He was just not all that effective. And frankly, the numbers weren't all that great either. He had a 5.02 FIP as well. The fastball was too straight. It was the reality of what happens when you're a two-pitch pitcher and the fastball's too straight. Guys are just going to tee off on it at some point, right? And this is kind of, maybe it should have been expected. But to make up for it, not to do the Vince McMahon, but God, he was special. Dinelson Lamet broke out in a big way, and he produced one of the best sliders literally in all of baseball and finished 4th in Cy Young voting. Yeah, that's how good Dinelson Lamet was. I want to remind everybody that dude was an absolute freak, and the only reason it didn't continue, frankly, was because of health. Like, this guy is just someone who got some health issues. He had a 2.09 ERA that year, by the way, which is frankly absolutely obscene. The only pitchers that were viewed as better than him in the National League that year were Jacob deGrom, Yu Darvish, and the lovely, and by lovely I mean the opposite, the antithesis of it, Trevor Bauer, the NL Central merchant that he was that year in terms of Cy Young voting. But deGrom and Darvish, who, of course, Darvish, future Padre, Lamet was that good. I frankly think that he could have finished higher than some other pitchers on that list, because I thought that he was just that freaking good. And maybe that's the product of, there's a bias I think we all have where when something unexpected happens, you want them to get rewarded for it. It's not as fun as when Mahomes wins another Super Bowl. It's more fun when, Jared Goff can go out there and do well or whatever it is. But Dinelson Lamet was a huge success. And also for the Padres, they acquired Zach Davies. Right? You remember the Zach Davies era? I don't want to remember what happened after this season, but at that time was a huge addition for the Padres. And for those who don't remember, the trade that got them Zach Davies was one that wasn't even focused on him. It was just kind of a back burner thing, but it worked out. They sent to the Milwaukee Brewers Eric Lauer, Luis Urias, and a player to be named later, who I'm not even sure who that turned out to be, frankly. But let me tell you, worked like a charm. And while Zach Davies wasn't someone who was part of the future of the Padres, it is important to note, this is kind of one of those moments where the Padres are like, hey, we found a way to get some value from a back-end guy. 2.73 ERA that year. He had a FIP of 3.88, so he did get a little bit lucky. But one thing he was good at is just being a pest. And that combo of Lamet to throw at people who could just go right at guys and throw those sliders and strike guys out, and then Davies, who he would toy with you. You know what I mean? It was a really good combination. And again, this will be not the first time that the Padres were able to get a lot of value out of a back-end guy that nobody's really talking about, or a signing that no one's really talking about. Davies was one of the first ones. Again, not an incredible pitcher, but these things matter, man, especially when you have a guy like Chris Paddock who doesn't perform how you would, ideally like him to. this stuff matters. Garrett Richards, not great that year, but you also had Mike Clevinger. And that was someone that I understand it didn't turn out well, but there's no doubting that Mike Clevinger, before all the injuries, before the Tommy John, which unfortunately that does happen sometimes. Guys will come back from Tommy John and just not be the same. I'm hoping it doesn't happen, but let's say Walker Buehler of the Dodgers, right? We saw that he has had a tough time adjusting and coming back from this Tommy John surgery. It's not something that's immediate, right? Maybe it's immediate for like the best pitchers, like your DeGroms of the world and whatnot, right? But when it comes to guys who are just pretty good, maybe it affects them more. And Mike Clevinger, at the time, I cannot forget, at the time in 2020 when the Padres acquired him, the lowest ERA marks amongst starting pitchers from 2017 to that point were Jacob deGrom, Clayton Kershaw, Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, and Mike Clevinger. That was the list. This was a good addition. And he did pitch pretty well for the Padres, right? In the limited time that he was there, 2.84 ERA. Granted, not in a ton of innings, only 19, but he was really, really good. And he was getting a decent amount of strikeouts as well. Maybe not as much as Dinelson Lamet, but he was very effective. And if not for that injury, I really do think that the Mike Clevinger move is viewed a lot differently, especially with the numbers that I mentioned. He was good at the time. And then Tommy John comes back, he's weird. And frankly, even a couple years ago, you saw this guy did have talent at one point. He is a little bit of a craphead, right? We all know that. We've all seen the allegations and all the stuff that's come out about him and why teams aren't touching him and whatnot. But at the time, he was a really good pitcher. He really was. And especially that year with the White Sox, 3.7 ERA. You know what I mean? Like, you could do worse for like the $1 million or whatever the White Sox gave him. So Clevinger was just what happens in baseball sometimes, right? Moving on, though, to 2021. Of course, this is when things got wild. And this is when I would be like, what exactly is going on here? Now, this is where I think was the last year before you saw that the Padres really entered into the phase of being, I think we're starting to dismiss the starting pitching or / any pitching, frankly, but that we can't develop pitching claims, right? In 2021, this was the last year before we got there, though. We had Yu Darvish, Blake Snell, and Joe Musgrove all join this team. And, well, we all know kind of how it panned out. Now, Yu Darvish was excellent. He was very, very good. But you can't really take as much credit for that one, right? Not as much. Yu Darvish, very, very good, but then he fell off in the second half. But part of that is because not only was the Padres pitching coach, our boy Larry Rothschild at the time, who I don't even know if he's currently with another team. I refuse to look it up. That's how disgusted I was with Larry Rothschild. But I'm kidding. But in all seriousness, Yu Darvish just fell off in the second half because he got hurt. Right, but overall, he still produced a really good season of a 3.10 ERA, a FIP of 3.31. He was great. And then we had the breakout of one Sir Joe Musgrove, a player that a lot of teams were interested in. So the Padres can't claim that they were the only ones, right? As much as they can on some other players we're going to talk about. But with Yu Darvish, and then also on top of that, you have the breakout of Joe Musgrove, who then throws the first no-hitter in Padres history. You can see that they're getting good at identifying talent, right? Not just developing, but identifying with this move, right? On top of all of that, like Joe Musgrove, they said, you know what, this curveball is great, and they made the rest of his repertoire even better. So Joe Musgrove, great move, and AJ Preller, man, he's done a lot better than people realize. And also, Blake Snell. Now, Blake Snell, here's the thing. Didn't go all that great. By the way, I was wrong. I was reading the wrong stats for Darvish. 4.22 ERA. He was electric in the first half, though. And Musgrove, 3.18 ERA. They had Blake Snell, who had a problem because this is the Larry Rothschild era, right? This guy came in there and was just a mess basically all year until the end of the season. And it also must be mentioned, I've been giving credit a lot to starting pitching. The Padres have done a good job at finding closers over the past few years. This was the Melanson year, if people forget. That was pretty good. Tim Hill was actually pretty effective in spots this year as well. Nabil Krismat was actually a little bit, remember him, a little bit effective at points. Pierce Johnson, guys like that. But all in all, I just think that what really occurred, though, is 2022, when the team finally got someone different. Introducing Ruben Niebla. Niebla, the god. We love him very much. The wizard that he is. Comes in, and Yu Darvish, guess what? He's back. Huge bounce back. I can't give Niebla all the credit for that. He does put together a 3.1 ERA. Maybe he deserves a little bit, though, because Darvish, while he did decrease in his strikeout stuff, he went longer into games, was a lot more consistent. and just didn't issue that many walks. That's what was so effective about him and what was so awesome about watching him pitch that year. He was just electric. He was awesome. And then you have Blake Snell, a little bit of a mess, but eventually got to it in 2022. In 2022, he did kind of have a big bounce back, even if it doesn't show that as much in the final ERA with Blake Snell, 3.38. He was basically untouchable for the second half of the season. And then Joe Musgrove, another great year. And then Mackenzie Gore deserves a tiny bit of credit for Niebla as well. He was effective in his role. He was eventually traded, obviously, in the blockbuster Juan Soto trade, but he did well. And for a player like him, who, by the way, was a disaster in the farm system. This is a guy that nobody knew what was happening. He was falling in prospect ranks. And then all of a sudden he comes up, our boy Niebla is like, hey, here's what you got to do. And he was effective. Low fours ERA guy, he got a little bit hurt. I don't count those. He had like 2 blow up starts, but it was clear that he was hurt. That's why he went to the IL for like the rest of the year. But all of that combined, Padres make the playoffs. It was very, very good. And then you have 2023 and 2024, which we're going to talk about in just a second, guys. But we've reached that point where we got to take a break to listen to a few words from our sponsors. And just like that, everybody, we are back here into the final segment of today's very just, oral history of the Padres pitching development as of late. We're now on 2023, folks. It's a good season, let me tell you. By the way, 2022, Nick Martinez even turned out pretty good. Got to give him some credit there. And he occasionally was used as a little bit of a starter. Good identification from not just Preller, but also acquiescing to the Padres culture thanks to the tutelage of A1 Ruben Niebla as well. Deserves a lot of credit. From what I've heard, Guardians really were thinking of making him their head manager. It just didn't go that way for whatever reason. I don't really know, but that's how it went. 2023. Niebla, man. Niebla's masterclass, in my opinion, the 2023 Padres. On top of some of the concerns, right? Everybody was like, okay, 2022 was great, but my God, are they really going to be able to keep this up? Well, they did, because not only do the Padres get a Cy Young season again out of Blake Snell, not for them, but this previous one with the Rays, they bring him back to his all-time peak, and he has one of the best stretches since Bob Gibson, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of consecutive starts of basically being a demigod. For those who don't know, Bob Gibson, very good at baseball, Hall of Famer. MLB pitchers with an ERA of 1.2 or lower over a 23 start span. So he did have a little bit of a growing pain at the beginning of 2023 because that's always what Snell does. But he had a 23 start span where he had a 1.20 ERA. And the only pitcher who had a better 23 start span in the history of baseball is Bob Gibson in 1968, who had an obscene 0.885, my lord. And then the only one I think that was modern-wise or a little bit more recent was Jake Arrieta, if people remember that year he had with the Cubs when he won his Cy Young, and he was untouchable as well, helped them as well, brought them up to the top, they win the World Series. So he had a historically good season. Yu Darvish, not as great, but it was basically just he got hurt again. Joe Musgrove, pretty great. Not as many innings because he did get hurt as well, as we all know, especially heading to last year, but 3.05 ERA did not fall off whatsoever. As usual, Musgrove is money. But they deserve credit for getting the best out of Seth Lugo and Michael Wacha. Michael Wacha has been an effective pitcher before. He's been okay before, so it's not maybe as surprising, but still, he put together a 3.22 ERA season. He was very effective for a team that we've talked about. It was basically just the offense didn't show up and was the least clutch team I've ever seen in my life, right? But Seth Lugo was a reliever. So for you to have the confidence to be able to bring in a guy like that who's going to be effective as a starter coming from a reliever role, Niebla was a big part of that too. And the Padres deserve credit. Those were 2 signings that everyone's like, really? You're just going to count on Lugo and Wacha? Like these guys are screwed. You know what I mean? If they don't have Yu Darvish, what are they going to do? They gave up Gore. What's going on here? And folks, they ended up having a really good pitching staff, all things considered, except for the fact that, yes, Yu Darvish was a little bit of a mess because he got hurt. But other than that, 2023 was Niebla's and the Padres' masterclass. And then 2024, which we all know about, right? Like, again, it cannot be understated that the Padres heading into 2024 were a little bit down. A lot of people were down on them, and they did have some good developments as well. Sure, it's not as impressive as the Lugo and Waka, and the fact that Darvish and Musgrove were effective or at least Musgrove, that the rotation was still pretty good, despite the fact that Darvish was dealing with injuries, and Musgrove too, frankly, that they still got some great value there. But also, in 2024, Michael King has an ace season. Dylan Cease, always good, but he has a return to form. Could it be motivation? Could it be ballpark? All of that stuff? Sure. But he has the lowest walk rate of his career, which tells me it's very possible he still has a Cy Young-ish season in him, because that was the only thing holding him back. Michael King, another guy, similar to the Lugo situation, mostly a long inning reliever guy. In Lugo's case, it was even more, like he was just a reliever, right? And then long inning reliever and occasionally one inning guy in Michael King. He, low-key, was like one of the best pitchers in the National League in all of last year. He was awesome, and let me tell you, it didn't stop there. Matt Waldron, a knuckleball pitcher, they were able to get some value out of. Darvish, he was effective again when he was healthy. Martin Perez, who they picked up at the deadline for nothing, he was able to produce at least good value for the end of that season, despite the fact that they were like, oh my God, we weren't able to get, who we wanted to get. We wanted to get a Jack Flaherty or something like that. They were not able to. But I digress. They were really effective. And then also, before the start of the 2024 season, they revealed their state-of-the-art pitching lab for Point Loma, how do I say this last? Nazarene University in San Diego. That's right. Winning organizations and organizations that care make moves like this. They invest in their team, not just in the on-the-field stuff, right? Not just in the front office and stuff like that, but also in pitching labs and hitting labs, making it easier for players to come there and make the best tunes and changes and fixes to better themselves, to be better prepared for the future and whatever there's going to throw at them. I think that means a lot. And AJ Cassavell of MLB.com did a great report on it. If you want to go read that, read up on the Padres pitching lab. That's cool. They have interviews with Darvish in there, and they talk about the home plate mounds and the high-tech cameras that they've got. That's really fun. But all in all, this all coalesces in basically the point I'm trying to make, which is the Padres have been doing pretty good over the past few years for a team that everyone likes to say just doesn't have any depth, right? That they're unable to put together a lot of pitching. This is a team, as I said at the top of the podcast, that was really regarded as the one that's like, target their pitchers, target their prospects. They don't know what they're doing. And frankly, some of their prospects haven't immediately blown up. Mackenzie Gore, good starter. I wish he was on the team. But he hasn't been the super duper star, and in a vacuum is absolutely a player worth giving up in order to acquire Juan Soto. Right? Not all the prospects and pitchers that they've given up have necessarily turned out amazing, and I think that means a lot. I don't feel like Dylan Lesko is getting as much hype as he used to. Robbie Snelling, he might do it a little bit with the Marlins, but all in all, I just think that they deserve a lot of credit, and it's for this reason that I'm really not worried about the 5th spot. With all the success and good and unexpected success that they found in guys, I just think that with all this staff, with the pitching lab, with Niebla, with Preller, with their scouting of late, just with their system, with their organization, I'm not saying that they are in the Dodgers tier, or that they are in the Guardians tier, or that they are in the Rays tier, where they're not like a meme, dare I say, right? Like there's always a thing about when baseball fans are following teams, when you see the Dodgers pick up Michael Kopech, everyone's like, yep, he's going to be amazing. And then he's amazing. When the Guardians pick up someone, you're like, yep, they're going to be great. Oh, the Rays churned out. We've never heard of this guy. All of a sudden, he's throwing 99 miles per hour. Those teams are like memes. But I think the Padres are getting into that tier that's right below there. Not all time, recent history, but nonetheless, it matters. And I think that it's something that we should keep in mind. So I'm not worried about the 5th spot because I think they're going to find a way. I really do. I think, or at least I think that they deserve a little bit of the benefit of the doubt that they're going to find another way. Would Roki Sasaki have been awesome? Yes. But do I think they can find value in one of Kyle Hart, Stephen Kolek, Randy Vasquez, or Matt Waldron? I will take that bet. It's not necessarily like a slam dunk, but I'll take the odds that they do, given what I've seen these past few years. But folks, that's all I got to say. That's all that needs to be said, some may say, on today's Locked On Padres podcast, guys. Remember to subscribe to the pod wherever you get podcasts from. Again, look forward to the episode coming out tomorrow when we're going to be doing some predictions. Just some predictions, some bold, some funny, some in between about the Padres in 2025. And then Friday, we are talking with Fangraphs writer, actually. I won't reveal his name. That'll be something for you to tune in tomorrow. about Jackson Merrill, his breakout season and whether or not he can replicate it, and the company that his season put him in. Everybody knows he was great last year, but we're going to list some names that are going to freak you out a bit. So that's going to be really fun for a fun Friday interview. But until that next time, everybody, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies, take care.